Hey, good evening. How y'all doing? All right, good evening, everybody. Good evening. Good evening. Um, Sorry for the late start. I know that some who may have been looking for us to start at 6 o'clock might have bounced off and waiting, but we are here now. It's Ministers on the Mic. It is your brother, your friend, Antoine Miller. And just like last week, we are going solo again this week. And as we are going solo, here's why. I want you to lift in prayer my friend, my brother, co host, pastor of the Double Rock Baptist Church of San Francisco. He's in Houston right now as Pastor Raynard Hillis's mom passed away just the other day. So, right now, he's in Houston taking care of things with his brother Raymond, Pastor Raymond Hillis, who's also down there in Houston getting prepared for Mother's Service, which I believe will be on this Saturday. So, Pastor Hillis, I don't know whether or not you're looking this evening, but want you to know we are praying for you and your family. And even as we get into what we're going to deal with tonight, let me first say there's so many things that are going on that we need to be aware of, that we need to be paying attention to. Um, that I really couldn't give a title to what we're going to talk about tonight, simply because it's almost going to be like a hodgepodge of issues that are going on. And so, again, as we deal with what's going on in society, I remind us of the scripture that we use each week, and that is 1 Corinthians chapter 12, 32nd verse, that we must be like the men who are in the tribe of Issachar, who had an understanding and awareness of the times, so that they might tell Israel what they ought to do. And that is our purpose. That's why we are here. We desire to share with our brothers and sisters in Christ those things that we ought to be doing. And so I'm going to ask, beloved, that you would simply again pray with and pray for Pastor Hillis and family as Mother Mary Hillis has passed away. We're lifting my brother up in prayer, and we miss him. Missed him last week, but as he is away taking care of mother, we're going to lift him continually in prayer. As we get into what we're going to be dealing with tonight, basketball season is back. I know those of us from the Bay Area, we're ready to see the Warriors kick off and see what the year is going to be like. They're starting the year off in LA playing against LeBron and them. LeBron James. I am hopeful that they will take care of that. Last week, we covered cancel culture, looking at issues that came out with John Gruden, as well as the Dave Chappelle special. And I am grateful for everyone that left their thoughts and their comments last week on those two topics. And we can even expand even further in looking at those things that had befallen the coach of some of y'all's beloved, not Oakland, beloved Los Vegas Raiders, um, and what was exposed with him. Isn't it interesting as we just think back on that? Um, what's in those other 650,000 emails that they are scouring through? And yes, who did John Gruden tick off? That as they're investigating the Washington Redskins, Bruce Allen, Dan Snyder, the owner of the Redskins, whatever is going on with the Washington football team, then the Washington Redskins, it was enough that they wanted to highlight Gruden and make him the sacrificial lamb, maybe the the deodorant or air freshener that they're going to spray over whatever the rest of the investigation is. For a whole lot of us, we say this is what the NFL is. That hadn't stopped us from watching, ain't going to stop us from watching. But this is what the NFL is. It has always been a good old boys club, right down from John Gruden thinking that it was disrespectful for Colin Kaepernick to have kneeled during the playing of the national anthem. And then what he said about Damari Smith, the president of the NFL's Players Association, in talking about the size of his lips. That brought its own scandal and racial charges. But like I said last week, they were allowing him to explain away the racial component. As he said, it was something that he says about people who are liars, calling them rubber lips and stuff like that. And for those that are football fans who are familiar with Gruden, we've never heard him use the term rubber lips in his 20 plus years of exposure in public light as a head coach football commentator. But moving beyond that, it was when uh, it was when he mentioned other things, homosexual slurs, homophobia, when he was talking about women, nude pictures of cheerleaders and stuff like that, that it was time for him to go. Why? Because the charge of racism simply wasn't enough. And that's where we ended last week's show in talking about maybe we as Black men have become collateral damage when it comes um, to the topic of civil rights and things like that. Because after all, it was blacks, and in particular the Black church, that really gave the push, the impetus, the momentum, the life to what was the civil rights movement that everyone else is able to build their movements upon because those civil rights apply to them also. But when the charge of racism was made, that was minimized while everything else was brought to the fore. Well, Gruden's out of the league, he's gone. And so, again, I say he was the sacrificial lamb as I step back and look at it a little bit more because it was the Washington football team that was being investigated. Um, and his relationship with the commissioners of the NFL since he's been in around the NFL has not always been a pleasant one. So calling Roger Goodell a homosexual slur really probably turned the heat up on that. But I am curious to see what the rest of the story is going to be. Stay tuned, stay tuned, stay tuned, because there is a whole lot more to come on that. And then on yesterday, a lot of us were awakened to the news that the great general, statesman, public figure, mentor to many, retired General Colin Luther Powell, had passed away April 5th, 1937 to October 18th, 2021. And yes, we know that it was, they said, due to complications from COVID-19. But it sparked something, him passing away with complications from COVID-19, because in that passing away with those complications, there's so much more to the story. And as I said last year, that the worst thing about COVID-19 is that it had become politicized. And because it became politicized, uh, it does not matter, my dear friends, what may be going on. People are playing to the politics. And in playing to the politics, you have the likes of Fox News and other outlets that simply focused on him passing away, um, from complications of COVID-19, and began to question uh, whether or not the shots, the vaccinations were any good. And that's not going to serve anyone any good in the long run, in questioning whether or not the vaccinations were any good. Let me just say, I've been vaccinated. I'm happy I've been vaccinated. General Colin Powell was 84, going on 85 years old. He had lived quite the storied life. And in living the life that he lived, his last interview with Bob Woodard, who was also the reporter that broke Watergate, also the reporter with the book Peril that has recently been released, that is exposing so much that went on in the Trump White House. In his last interview with Bob Woodard, General Colin Powell makes a statement that continues to allow him to be that stand up guy that so many of us thought and know him to be and looked up to him for. Did he make mistakes in life? Yes. And he owned up to his mistakes, the biggest of which saying he wished, or that he had said that his presentation of why the U.S. should be going into war in the Middle East in search of WMDs in Iraq. He says it was erroneous information that was given to him as the Joint Chiefs. And as the Joint Chiefs, he acted on that erroneous information. And under President George Bush, George W., we did go to war. But he owned up to that mistake. We're talking about someone who was the son of Jamaican immigrants raised in Brooklyn and Harlem. Um, Someone who has a story that is similar and familiar with many, many of us, right down to public housing, public school, city college, before going off to university and ultimately going in the United States Army. Uh, 2 tours in Vietnam, a storied career in the military, and even in leading our troops under the first Bush into uh, the war that was in Kuwait, the Desert Storm at that time, led admirably. And even in his retirement, and this is something that is just remarkable about Colin Powell, because you won't hear this a lot of a whole lot of people who are military in the public eye, has some acumen with the political arena, because he was the first black man to be chairman of the Joint Chiefs. In other words, without a five-star general that was in place in any branch of the military, he was over the Joint Council of the generals, um, for each, and admirals for each branch of the service. They followed his directive in carrying out to the other branches of service, which to me is a remarkable thing that a black man was able to do that. Upon retirement, he became Secretary of State. And, you know, the first African American to be Secretary of State in the US. That is a remarkable thing. And one of the things, as Michael Caton had pointed out, he lived a life of accountability. One of the things about Colin Powell, with that life of accountability, knowing his responsibility, was a great amount of respectability. What do you mean? He is probably the only person that I can recall in my lifetime that both Democrats and Republicans wanted to run for the office of presidency or to be vice president on the ticket. Both parties had that kind of interest in Colin Powell. That's how much integrity he had. That's how transparent he was. That was the accountability that he had. And so I salute the life of the general. But unfortunately, in saluting the life of the general, again, as I said, Fox News, in its reporting of his death, uh, many of its hosts did what was a half a double crooked letter job. What I'm going to do real quick is just play a clip that I posted on Facebook because I want you all to hear what Fox News had to say with regards to the fallen general Colin Powell. I think this is something that is important for this discussion on tonight because, in looking at how they felt about Colin Powell, it says a whole lot, my brothers and sisters, uh, how they feel about U.S. Our policies, where we are as a country. It speaks a lot to how racism, division in this country has not moved. And I want you to hear this clip that I'm trying to pull up from the one and only Tucker Carlson, conservative talk show host there on Fox News, and what he had to say with regards to the late General Colin Powell. I'm going to have that in just a second. Let's see, I think I might have it right now. And I'm going to let this go ahead and play. And after this plays, we'll come back. We're going to talk about that for just a little bit.
Him for that. But for most of his life, he was much bigger than mere politics. If you're old enough to recall the first Gulf War, you know that Colin Powell was one of the last public officials that most Americans believed in. Powell's life, his story, seemed to confirm everything that was good about this country. Powell grew up in the South Bronx, the son of immigrants from Jamaica. In 1958, he received his commission in the U.S. Army. At that time, much of the country was living under Jim Crow laws, but Colin Powell thrived regardless. He served 2 tours in Vietnam with distinction. He went on to advise presidents, and in the end, he made it all the way to the top of the U.S. military. After he retired, he became Secretary of State. Toward the end of his life, Powell sometimes said that his remarkable career was proof that affirmative action worked, but it always seemed like a half-hearted talking point. Anyone who knew Powell personally can confirm that he was as impressive as any person in the U.S. government, and far more than most of them.
All right. That ain't working out the way I wanted it to work out, y'all. I wanted to bring up that Tucker Carlson piece tonight because Tucker Carlson says some things in that piece that is so endemic and systemic of the problems that we have here in America as it relates to race relations, the division that is in this country, and even think he doesn't give what would be the best.
He was legitimately smart, deeply knowledgeable about the world. He was openly patriotic. He was hardly a diversity hire. He was so obvious superior to a lot of people who died this morning at the
All right, we're going to try one more again. All right, so here we go. We're going to bring it from the beginning, and it's about 3 minutes, and we're going to be right back. Let's talk about it.
What a life that was. In his his later years, Powell became enmeshed in partisan politics, and younger people may remember him for that. But for most of his life, he was much bigger than mere politics. If you're old enough to recall the first Gulf War, you know that Colin Powell was one of the last public officials that most Americans believed in. Powell's life, his story, seemed to confirm everything that was good about this country. Powell grew up in the South Bronx, the son of immigrants from Jamaica. In 1958, he received his commission in the U.S. Army. At that time, much of the country was living under Jim Crow laws, but Colin Powell thrived regardless. He served 2 tours in Vietnam with distinction. He went on to advise presidents, and in the end, he made it all the way to the top of the U.S. military. After he retired, he became Secretary of State. Toward the end of his life, Powell sometimes said that his remarkable career was proof that affirmative action worked. But it always seemed like a half-hearted talking point. Anyone who knew Powell personally can confirm that he was as impressive as any person in the U.S. government, and far more than most of them. He was legitimately smart, deeply knowledgeable about the world. He was openly patriotic. He was hardly a diversity hire. He was so obviously superior to a lot of the people around him. When the supposedly brilliant Harvard-educated neocons in the Bush administration assured us that the occupation of Iraq would be quick and simple, Colin Powell knew better. He may have gone to lowly city college, but he was smarter and wiser than they were. Unlike other people in Washington, Colin Powell got where he was on merit, and that was inspiring to watch. Powell's success meant that our system worked. Our system was meritocratic at the time. It elevated the best. 30 years ago, our meritocracy was the country's unifying principle. All Americans were proud of it. Colin Powell embodied it. A lot has changed in the years since, and that's one of the reasons that Colin Powell's death tonight is so poignant. Like almost everyone his age, Colin Powell was fully vaccinated against COVID, and yet according to his family and doctors, Colin Powell died of COVID. Of course, that fact does not make his death any less sad, nor is it unusual. Many thousands of vaccinated Americans have died of COVID. Former CDC Director Robert Redfield announced just today that about 40% of all recent COVID deaths in the state of Maryland, for example, are among those who've had both shots. So what does that tell you exactly? Well, it tells you you've been lied to. Vaccines may be highly useful for some people, but across the population, they do not solve COVID. That's not speculation. It is an observable fact. People who've been fully vaccinated can still get the virus, they can still transmit the virus to others, and they can still die from COVID. Colin Powell is hardly the only example of that. So the question is, why are they telling us otherwise? And the answer is simple. They're telling us that to divide us from each other, to set the country against itself. That's been going on for a long time, but it never needed to happen. There's no inherent reason that a virus should rip apart the United States. COVID easily could have brought us together. Shared suffering often does that. 9/11 did that. And yet from the very beginning, demagogues like Joe Biden and many others have used this virus as a hammer to smash the bonds that connect Americans to one another.
All right, and so that's where we stop it on him pointing out that it is a nation that is divided. My friends, Tucker Carlson did several things in that clip. Number one, you see an attack on affirmative action in the clip. What's the attack on affirmative action? As Colin Powell stated, that he would never have been there if it had not been for affirmative action. Uh, Tucker Carlson points out that we live in a meritocracy. In other words, he got there because of his merit, that he deserved to be there. Let me agree with him that Colin Powell did deserve to be where he was at. But Colin Powell had enough sense to recognize that he would not have had the opportunity to get to where he was had it not been for affirmative action. And that's reaching way back to him being a high schooler that went to New York City College and then ultimately took advantage of affirmative action programs in the 60s so that he would be able to attend a 4-year university. But then what is really devious, deceptive, and devilish in Tucker Carlson's diatribe on last night was him using it as an anti-vaccination platform. I'm not going to tell you to get vaccinated. I did. I'm glad I did. I'm not going to tell you that you need to be vaccinated. I did, and I'm glad I did. And I hope that by example, there's something in being vaccinated that will move others to get vaccinated, so that we can get back to some kind of normalcy in this thing that we call life. But he said that it is the left that has taken COVID and used it as a hammer to divide this nation. Many will remember that I've been saying for over a year that the worst thing about COVID-19 is that it got politicized. COVID-19 was first politicized when the former president tried to hide the fact that we had this thing that was spreading across the country. Tried to belittle it, even said that it was just a cold. And when it comes to division in this nation was divided far before there were issues with COVID 19 and people dying of the disease. We had issues with division under that current president, even before there was the issue of COVID 19. So we are in a nation that is divided, and we have allowed things that should unite us to become those things that further separate us. Jesus says in the book of Matthew, chapter number 12, that a house divided or a kingdom divided shall not stand. And the U.S. is in position where it is a nation that is divided. How are we going to be able to stand? I want you to think about some things that were said by the former president just on last week, and what he had said last week as it relates to losing the election. No, he said, no, we didn't lose it. It was taken. And in that divisive statement, he called on other Republicans to not participate in the 2022 elections and the 2024 elections. The question is, how do you win an election if you don't participate in it? And as it relates to Colin Powell, the vitriol that he has towards Colin Powell went on full display as he called him a rhino, a Republican in name only, uh, pointed out that he made mistakes. But former president Colin Powell was a man that owned up to his mistakes, while you continue to be the former liar and chief. Um, I am hopeful because of things that I seen from the former general, who lived an exemplary life, owned up to his mistakes, was accountable, which is something we should all desire to be and desire to do. Other things that we really want to get out or grist for the mill on tonight, the state of Georgia. There's so much going on in the state of Georgia. First and foremost, the trial for the McMichaels have started. Who are the McMichaels? The McMichaels and their buddy are the ones who last year killed Ahmaud Arbery and murdered Ahmaud Arbery. Y'all, I really think that the state of Georgia is up to something, because when it comes to Ahmaud Arbery being murdered by the McMichaels and their friend who recorded everything, um, the senior McMichael, who had former relations or employment with the community or the civic community there. I believe he might have been a former police officer, everything, things of that nature. You have the district attorney that did not move to have them arrested. COVID-19 was such a divisive issue politically and had taken up so much of the oxygen in the room that it was not talked about this young man being murdered by these two white men who hunted him down as he went jogging. Yesterday and today was jury selection. I'm bringing up jury selection in a sense, in this sense, is that if the trial of the McMichaels stay in the New Brunswick area in Georgia, I do not think it will be a fair trial. I think that McMichaels and their friend, whose name I forget, will truly be tried by a jury of their peers. Now, I know we have a system where 12 people are uh, appointed to serve jury duty a quote jury of our peers. But when I say that they'll be appointed a jury of their peers, they will be appointed a jury that is like minded, in my opinion, because you do have a district attorney that did not want to arrest them. Months after Ahmaud Arbery had been murdered, these three had been seen living normal lives in New Brunswick, New Jersey, shopping and dining, enjoying their families while this young man's body was laying in its grave. And here's the next reason I say it will not be a fair trial. Uh, the Glenn County webpage, watch this, gave potential jurors access to suppressed evidence in the murder of Ahmaud Arbery. What did they get access to? The court mistakenly gave potential jurors access to Ahmaud Arbery's mental health history. I bring that up because it's important to understand that this will jade the case against giving him a fair trial and delaying justice. The Georgia County Court trying the alleged murderers of Ahmaud Arbery has mistakenly exposed potential jurors to suppressed evidence. The suppressed evidence, including his mental health history, which the judge banned from the trial. Now, even though it is banned from the and William Roddy Bryant.